Welcome everybody to the Knowledge Network with the wonderful Sachit Gupta of CreatorsMBA. I'm Amanda from the Podcast Academy, and this is a place where we're going to hear some tips and tricks in an abbreviated amount of time, and then we're going to get to know each other as well. So I wanted to just thank you, Sachit, for joining us. Sachit, again, is the founder of CreatorsMBA, who has helped establish content creators to level up their content and growth through CreatorsMBA. And you're going to hear about some pretty big names that Sachit has helped us see their influence grow on YouTube, among other places. And YouTube is the focus today. Sachit, I will invite you to introduce yourself further and go ahead, share your screen. I'm going to mute myself and put our pretty logo on here, but thank you again, everybody, for being here with us today.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. One quick question before we dive in. I'd love to hear just in the chat, like if people are already on YouTube or not, and roughly how many episodes everyone has published, so we have a sense of where the audience is in their podcasting journey.
Looks like we have a few folks here, and then there's some folks who just got started. I started mine about a week ago, Sachit.
Oh, perfect.
Oh my gosh, we got people dialing in from Mexico. So it looks like you've got some really great spread of people who are early and then a little further along in the pipeline. Certainly not as advanced as some of your clients, but they will get there. I believe in all of us.
Yeah, no, this is perfect. So what we'll do today then is I'll do a mix of sort of stuff that if you're a seasoned podcaster, you might think it's very elementary, but it's sort of the foundational structural stuff. So we'll start with that. Some of it I'll run through fast because it seems like people are definitely more advanced on the podcasting side. And then if people have questions, just feel free to interrupt or call out to Amanda, and or we can cover in the Q&A at the end. So perfect. In terms of today's session, like I said, what I want to do is I want to start with the principles and strategy and then get tactical. Because one of the things I've learned in this game is it's really hard to build on a shaky foundation. So you want to make sure you get the fundamentals right. So we'll sort of like start abstract, and then as we go, we'll go more and more specific. So quick background on me. I basically have been working with creators and podcasters for 10 plus years, helped them both on the audience growth side and the revenue side, helped work with Tim Ferriss and Seth Godin's alt-MBA on the audience growth side, launched my show, and through paid media, we were able to get it to hit number 25 in the country. And most recently built and ran the first cohort of the On Deck Podcast Fellowship. And also we started going on YouTube last year. And through that, really started looking and diving deep into the data of a lot of successful YouTube channels. And so we've really learned a lot through that that I'll share. And so before we dive into sort of like the three sections we're going to cover, I want to take a second to really quickly talk about the podcasting journey, because I think it's something a lot of us forget, which is audience growth in this medium actually really just takes time. Less than 5% of shows get 1,000+ downloads. Most podcasts don't go past 20 episodes. And so I think especially early on, it's really important to prioritize resonance over reach, because it's easy to bring people to your show, but if you haven't done the work of creating a really great show, most of those people aren't going to stay in. Sort of that audience building just goes to waste. This is some stats from Buzzsprout in terms of what average episode downloads look like, and I was blown away, especially by this one, where if you get more than 1,000 downloads, 1,100 downloads in the first 7 days, you're actually in the top 5% of podcasting. And this was something that was really surprising to me. And this is a great example too, this post from Jack Butcher on how most people end up quitting after 20 episodes. And this is from Dave Nemitz, who founded Bleacher Report. And this was a really great point that he made, where I think 5-10 years ago, you could build a show by basically having a bunch of big name guests, and that was enough to have a successful podcast. But now that every guest is going on multiple shows, you really just have to like define a differentiation and the charisma or whatever. And we'll talk about like the podcast brand to stand out from everyone else, because again, you can bring in the views, but if you aren't different, people aren't going to stay, because YouTube is essentially like a TV channel where people are flipping through videos, subscribers, and all these different things to find what they want to watch. This is actually a 10-year-old quote from Gary Vaynerchuk, 10 or even more, I think, where he talks about how every company has now become a media company. And I think this is more true than ever, especially podcasting. Every company is now starting a podcast because it's probably one of the easiest mediums to create content in. So that means competition is going more and more. And again, it really means that we have to define a podcast brand to be able to stand out. So like I said, since there's a lot of seasoned podcasters here, I'll cover this section quickly so that we can spend more time on the YouTube side. So this is, and you can find more in this article that's linked here. This is a talk that I did with Sonal Chokshi, who runs the podcast for A16Z, which is a really great big VC firm. And a lot of it was talking about like, how do we actually define a podcast brand? Because what happens is a lot of times, especially for interview show, people will just start doing interviews and recording and asking the same questions. And so for your audience, they're like, how is the show different, right? And so her trick was really thinking about the category that your show is in. And ideally, you're trying to actually create a new category and starting by coming up with a 2-word concept that really like describes your show. So for example, when she was the editor-in-chief at Wired, their 2 words were informed optimism. My show is around the business of being a creator. So it's literally business of creators. That's sort of like what I started with. And that's been the North Star throughout. And once you have a brand, the other thing that she actually, like, that was a really great tip was in terms of if you want to get big guests, and I'll actually share a really amazing stat that we saw in terms of big guests on YouTube and how that works. But if you want to really like big guests, she talks about how you can essentially use FOMO to get them to be a guest on your show. So instead of going to someone who's like very well known, hey, can I interview you? You could come up with like a series around your niche, right? So for example, how X emissions or whatever are affecting climate or something in climate, for example, and come up with guests. And then when you reach out, you say, hey, we're interviewing like 3 to 5 top experts. Do you want to be a part of that? And suddenly you've created the scarcity. And the thing is, one of the biggest lessons I've learned in 10 plus years of marketing is everyone wants what they can't have. So if we can create this false scarcity in a world of abundance, that's one way you can really like get big guests to convert. And then you can basically package your episodes around that theme. And that sort of like becomes your unique value add. And this is, again, we're talking about like using format structure and the different shtick to like punch above your weight and get those kinds of guests. The other thing we've also started doing is when we're really defining a podcast, we're really like thinking of it as like a syllabus for a class almost. So for example, this is one example where we define different pillars for the brand. And then for each pillar, you can define different themes and goals. And then based on that, you can create different categories of content. So as an example, we worked with a show out of Germany last year, and her show was sort of like at the intersection of business and Chinese metaphysics. And so this is what that looked like for her show in terms of the different themes, the different pillars, the different goals, and then what the content actually looks like. I see a hand raised too. Amanda, go ahead.
I was just curious, for those of us who aren't so like immersed in the editorial world or the marketing world, can you give us another word for pillar? Would those be like 3 different streams of knowledge that we would categorize within our concept? Or is there a better way to understand what a pillar would be? Is it a work stream?
Well, I don't know what a work stream would mean.
I suppose what we could say is like, when you're thinking of all your content, when you map it out, how would you reorganize it around pillars?
Yeah, so I guess one example would be like, let's say Nike wants to create content in around running, right? One pillar could be interviews with successful athletes. One pillar could be before and after. So in terms of like, this is what someone's story was before, now this is what it looks like after. One pillar could be how-to content. So it's like, like how to pick the best running shoe if you're running a marathon 10-mile marathon in X desert. That becomes more how-to content. So that's how we think about it in terms of different pillars. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that translates into YouTube, which I know you're getting to.
Yes, I'll actually share like a live example of how we did that for someone and what it led to. So I'll spend less time on this, but this is basically about really like creating a narrative for your show and framing a narrative for your podcast with a beginning, middle, and end. Because as when we talk about YouTube, one of the things that YouTube really looks at is how much of your content people have actually watched. And the more the better. So really like once what we started doing is once we record an episode, we're really editing for a narrative to make sure it flows almost like a movie with like a beginning, middle, and end. To make sure people are interested throughout. And five levers that you can use to actually change the narrative is you can change the arc or the length and the framing of the podcast. You can change the actual content substance. You can change the energy, and a lot of that happens actually before you record. So making sure the guest is energetic before you start recording, the charisma of the guest, and differentiation of insights. So an example would be if there's a guest who's very charismatic, but has less insight, you can actually cut the episode to be shorter, because then that means people are going to watch more of it, which is great feedback for the YouTube algorithm in terms of showing it to other different people. So now let's talk about how to grow your podcast. And this section I'll move really quickly because it's really just about like sort of like basic marketing and sales. Before that, Amanda, did that answer your question on why it's critical for YouTube?
Yeah, from what I'm understanding, YouTube is really specifically looking at content and kind of coding it or assessing it on how people watch it, and maybe noticing how people move through the content. So that's why it's important to have a beginning, middle, and end kind of narrative flow versus standalone evergreen episodes that don't seem to have continuity.
Exactly. And it's really, and that's why it becomes important to sort of like honestly like make every second count, because at any point, if a viewer goes away or like clicks off the video, that is negative feedback for YouTube in terms of that people aren't interested, right? So like some of the things that we do is from the start of the video, we were going to make like a full like 1 minute intro, and then we realized people don't really watch it, they skip over it, so remove that. In terms of the ending of the video, if you sort of like give an indication that the video is going to end, and then you continue for 3 minutes, as soon as people hear that, they click off the video, right? So that means 3 minutes of the video is unwatched, which is again negative feedback for YouTube. So and this is kind of like a sort of like a trick, which is what a lot of people will do is they'll just end the video abruptly, so that the feedback that YouTube is getting is people have watched the full video instead of they didn't watch the end 2 minutes or whatever. So it's really and I think someone who does that really well is Mr. Beast, because if you watch any of his videos, there's no intro. In the first 3 seconds, he set the subtext. In the first 10 seconds, he's told you like the whole what's going to happen in the whole video, and then you're just like, okay, I just want the payoff for all the things that you've already shown me as the hooks that are going to happen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sachit. That's really helpful. I'm taking good notes and trying to track all this in the chat.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll move through this section quickly. I'll just kind of like touch on the most important points. This really basically talks about how there's this marketing maze around us in terms of all the different platforms and things we can be doing. Here are some of the things that marketers will tell you to do in one day. And you're like, wait, I have 1 day. How do I do everything when I'm actually going to do a podcast, right? A client of mine, she looked at this list and she said, it's like throwing darts at a dartboard with a blindfold on while being spun around in circles. Because a lot of times this is actually what marketing today feels like, because there's so many options and every marketer is telling you to do a different thing. And so I always like going back to the basics of like, what does a marketing process actually look like? And it's about, so this is like what a process looks like. And we'll send everyone the slides if they want to go into detail on this. But really what it comes down to is how do you get traffic? How do you convert that to traffic to people watching your videos and being more interested in what you're doing? And then if they listen, how do you actually encourage referrals? And really what we're going to focus on is the conversion and referrals part, because if you can create something that's great, then once you turn on traffic to it, more people will stay, and then it just becomes a better feedback loop for all these different algorithms. And so when we start thinking about how do we actually really do that, I always look at like, what is the market? Like, who are you targeting? What is the message you're taking to them? And then what is the medium? And obviously in this case, in terms of medium, we're going to focus on YouTube. So let's quickly talk about market and message. And the biggest lesson here is I think when people start creating content, they're always trying to target everyone. But really, like if you're for everyone, you end up being for no one, right? And so the big tip is don't try and be all things for all people. And the way I like solving this is we like coming up for every client with this sort of like intersection of what is that mountain that you're trying to climb in terms of the topics that you're talking about. And let's say if you only pick one topic, right? Audience building, it's really hard to be an expert in that. But if you have 2 topics or 3 topics and you sort of like go for the intersection of those, usually at that intersection, there's very few people that have like, sort of like mastered all 3 and also are interested in all 3. So in my case, for example, I started out and I was doing all these different things and at one point I basically decided I'm going to focus on audience building, audience monetization, and podcasting. And so I'm not the best at any one of these, but at the intersection, I have a chance of being one of the best, right? Because maybe there's very few people that are talking about all 3. And so what this also allows you to do is bring your personality in. So let's say you're really into and I'm just going to take a random example from a friend like knives, right? I have a friend who has a brand around knives. And so if he can talk about knives, and in this case, like related to podcasting, I could never do it the same way that he does. And that's how he creates his unique ability that then translates to all his YouTube videos. And then that becomes his unique brand. So it's really like finding this intersection of 3 things where you can be the best and where you can be known. And then in terms of message, the main thing here is there's so much, again, like coming to you from like all these different sides of what to actually say. So what we start doing, the way we do messaging is we really like start by studying the niche and studying like who the influencers are. One huge tip that I learned was, let's say you're talking about, I'll just use podcasting as an example, right? Studying the top books on Amazon for it and looking at the 1 and 2 star reviews, because that will basically show you what people want to hear about. And then all of that information can flow into your content pillars. So these are some worksheets that we do when we do messaging, and if people want to access, we can share those. And so now that we have like understood the marketing process, we know sort of like who our market is, we know the message we're taking to them, we can start talking about how to leverage YouTube. So in terms of YouTube, we started doing YouTube and content on YouTube around October of last year. And then really quickly ended up building a team that basically studied a lot of top YouTube accounts, in aggregate tens of millions of subscribers and billions of views. So a lot of these tips have come from studying that amount of data, but also my personal experience over the last 9 months. And I should also just like highlight that this is not just me, this is like a team now, like that is studying data. So a lot of the insights come from that. The first thing was really understanding what does YouTube actually care about? And it's really interesting, like there's so much that goes into it, but when it comes down to it, what YouTube cares about is, are people interested in the video that you're watching, and do they actually want to watch it, right? So if we quickly go on YouTube, basically what YouTube cares about is if someone comes to this page, do you have a thumbnail or something that is enticing enough for people to click in terms of your title and thumbnail combo? And so if people click that, then it cares about, okay, so now that people are here, are you actually giving them the payoff that they expected, so that they either watch the whole thing, or through this, they look for another video to watch. And what that translates to in terms of metrics is 3 metrics, which is the click-through rate. So out of 100 people who saw the screenshot and the text, how many actually watched the video? And then watch time. So let's say like they go to the video and how much of the video have they watched? And then the average view duration, which is how much of the total video are they actually watching? So I'll actually show you guys an example of one of our top performing videos so far. And so this was a podcast that I recorded with this guy, Sam Ovens, on how to like build online courses and stuff. And I'll show you some of the key things here that for me really unlocked why YouTube is so important for podcasting or for podcasters. First is this: in terms of traffic sources to the videos, 50% of videos or viewers came from browse, 20% of video people came from YouTube search, and then 13% came from suggested videos, which is sort of like this stuff here, right? And so the crazy thing is 80% of traffic came through YouTube, which really solves the discoverability podcast problem that we have all know exists within podcasting. In terms of average view duration, it was 13 minutes, and then people viewed an 11% average. Now, this for other videos usually ends up being between 5 and 11 minutes. And so because it was so much on the top end, I think that's the reason why YouTube really like pushed this video all these like different ways. And the 10,000 views that it's gotten so far have all come organically. Like we didn't really have to do any work to do it. We literally just published the video and YouTube liked it, people liked it, so it started suggesting it more. So this is sort of like the power of what happens when you actually create something that YouTube likes. Second lesson was what kind of content should I create? So this is where some of the content pillars come back into this, which is really like start by defining where your content pillars are and creating content within that. One thing we saw that was a really interesting stat that I don't think most podcasters think about is we basically took a huge sample size of videos and podcasts that people have published and looked at a metric which is called STV, which is basically subscriber to view ratio. So that what that means is, let's say someone comes to your channel, right? And they watch an interview with a guest and it gets 1 million views. How many of those viewers actually turn into subscribers? And what we found was if you have a podcast that's with a famous guest, while it's going to get a lot of views, a much shorter percentage of those views will actually turn into subscribers if people don't have any resonance with you. So because of that, one of the things we're doing with all of our clients is starting to create solo content, which is just you talking to the camera, because even if it gets less views, more of those views turn into subscribers. Because in the case of a famous guest, people are really coming for the guest. So they're going to listen to that interview, but they're not going to watch all the other interviews you're doing unless they actually vibe with your personality. Any questions on that or so far on this?
These are hot tips. People are really resonating with this. And do you mind refreshing, what does STV stand for? Is it subscriber to viewer?
Yeah, so basically it's out of like how many, let's say like 1 million views, right? How many of those viewers can turn into subscribers? So for example, like to put it concretely, let's say you do an interview with a guest and it gets 1 million views. And let's say out of that million, 10,000 people actually turn into subscribers. You might then post a solo video that gets 500,000 views. So like half the number of views, but the number of subscribers that, or number of viewers that turn into subscribers might actually be 5,000. So on a percentage basis, many more viewers turn into subscribers for a solo piece of content versus a guest, because they're actually resonating with you, not just the guest and then leaving.
Awesome.
And then in terms of like, another thing that always comes up is like, how do we sort of like use shorts versus long form? And what we've really like come to is shorts are really great for like audience growth. So like it'll like make your content reach more people. But if you want people to like actually capture those people and retain them, that's where the longer form of videos comes in.
Got a question here. How long is long form? What are the demarcations of short versus long form for YouTube?
We're still honestly exploring this. What I found though is if content is interesting, people will stay, right? So for example, this video, you can actually see what the retention looks like, and it's a 2-hour video. And so there's usually a 90% drop off that happens in the first like few minutes. And this is also why you want to remove anything extra that like makes people leave from the start of the video, because there's already a huge drop off. But you can see like in this case, like people have kind of like on average stayed. But if the content wasn't interesting, people would just leave. So my answer to that question always is, if you're creating something interesting, I don't think there's anything too long, because people still watch a 3-hour interview with Joe Rogan still.
Gotcha. So it sounds like it's kind of work in progress, but we can generally say short form is not 2 hours.
Yes, definitely not 2 hours, no.
Really quick question to follow up on this, if it's okay. And again, folks, please drop your questions to the chat. This is just so riveting. Oh, these are such good questions. Well, I'll start with Paulette's. What's the limit for a short? And maybe what we mean is like, when we're thinking of a short form, what's too short?
Um, I think YouTube just increased their limit from 60 seconds to more. I think so. But again, we're not really looking at the limit. What we're trying to do is create the short in a way that people watch throughout and even repeat, because the more you can watch, get them to like full completion and repetition, the more YouTube will show it to more people. So I think there might be a technical limit. I don't remember what that is, but in terms of the actual content, we're going from anywhere from between like 30 to 90 seconds, as long as people keep coming back to it and watching.
Great. And that kind of corroborates basic marketing research when you basically have for an elevator pitch, which I suppose we could conceptualize this first 30 seconds to retain somebody and keep them listening. That's like 20 to 40 seconds. People in the chat can please correct me on that data. It's a really interesting data point, probably from Tim Ferriss, who you worked with. Oops, did I break that for you?
That's okay. Yeah, pull that guy. YouTube is 60 seconds. That's right. Cool. Any question on this, or we'll move to the next one?
Well, Amanda also asked another great question. Are people watching or playing without looking at the visual? I mean, does YouTube, pun intended, have eyes on that level of data?
I haven't seen that, but in talking to people, this was really interesting for me, which is I always believed that people listen to podcasts for information or education. What I've now realized is people are actually listening to podcasts for companionship. So really, like they're looking for that feeling of, oh, I'm in the same room with the person. So I think in that case, people are watching the video, and it's really just like the reason for that is because when they're watching the video, it really feels like you're in the same room with the host and the guest.
I love that.
Awesome. Okay, let's go to the next one. So we're talking about the content pillars. Next one is because this question comes up a lot too, which is how to approach YouTube SEO. And the biggest, again, like surprise for me here was coming from a world of audio podcasting, is when you're thinking about titles for YouTube videos, it has to be both clickable and searchable. So for example, when someone comes to this page on YouTube, right, or like they're looking at the suggested thing, it's the mix of the image and what it says here that is going to make them to click. But also YouTube has this big search bar in here. So you want to make sure that the YouTube tags and metadata is enough so that when someone searches for this, so let's say like someone comes and searches for Sam Oven's course business, right? We are really trying to make sure we hit those. And so let's see if it actually comes up. So this is it's the first, second, third, fourth, and these are all his videos. But the first video that comes up that isn't his is actually mine, because it's titled with Sam Ovens, because his name is recognized. And we have building 7-figure businesses, making courses, and creating content as like the main pillars that this interview addresses. And so in terms of SEO, you really want to pay attention to the metadata, title, description, tags, and keywords, and put those keywords naturally throughout the elements so that YouTube's algorithm has context for discoverability. And again, going back here, because of that discoverability and how we did the title and stuff, 80% of traffic has just been provided by YouTube, which is something that like is really missing in audio podcasting. I see a lot of comments here. I think there's, yeah, sorry, SEO is search engine optimization. I forgot to mention that.
Very quick question, Sachit. When you upload your YouTube videos, there is a little note that said that hashtags and stuff don't have impact. So it literally said it will have little impact on your searchability. I don't know if you've noticed that or experienced that, but that's something I was surprised by when I saw that. So curious about how, like, paying attention to the videos tags, do you mean like in the description itself for like when a user is searching for a video, it would retrieve results based on like the summary that you put underneath the video?
There's summary, and there's also sort of like the tags that you can add here in terms of these. I wouldn't say we have conclusive data on if this helps or not. But the person I brought on, because he's looked at so much data and they're still putting it, I'm assuming it still helps.
Okay, thank you.
Probably not as much, I'm guessing, but it still does. Cool. Should we move to the next one?
Yeah, I know you have a couple more really hot lessons here, and we have about, I'd say about 7 minutes left, and then we'll go into breakouts, or we can just do a large group Q&A because we have 14 folks in here. So we'll get a read from the audience on what they'd like to do at that time.
Perfect. Okay, I'll cover these fast, and then we can do that. So now let's come to the back to the content pillars and stuff, and structuring the video. And so one of the big shifts I had to make was really like both audio and visually. Think about every podcast we're making as almost like a product. And so you want to really like optimize the structure to focus on the user experience. A huge part of it is like clear timestamps and section topics, and then chapters and segments, because then people can navigate videos easily. So for example, in this one, we really like make sure we get these to be detailed, and you can actually see in the data later on where YouTube will tell you like certain sections that are the most played or most replayed. And sometimes you'll actually see, because of what we cover, certain videos will have a spike around a certain timestamp, and then that's where people are coming back for a lot. And so that really helps on the structure side. And then now let's talk about let's sort of like bring everything together, and I'll kind of like do a little quick case study of a channel that we were working with, and sort of like what looking at the numbers, making all these changes, and what that led to. So first is like, just if you compare podcasting to podcasting, YouTube gives so much more data. You can get total subscribers, you can get average attention, view duration, watch times, impressions, CTR, and all these different things. So what we basically do is, for every channel, we're tracking it week over week, and then we're tracking it by videos in terms of what is the STV number, which is what we had talked about, what is the retention for each video, views, average view duration, and all these different things. Whenever we start working on a channel, then we basically use that to bucket videos into different sort of like categories, categorized by basically like average impressions and average CTR. And then this will basically tell you, oh, okay, these are the kinds of videos that are actually getting more impressions. This kind of content maybe isn't working. And then this is the kind of stuff people are clicking on more, and this is the kind of stuff that people aren't really clicking on. From there, we basically take all of that data. And actually, so two concepts here that, again, are really important is like retention and watch time. So YouTube is prioritizing whatever keeps viewers engaged and watching for longer durations. Any sort of like prolonged part where like people are distracted or whatever, you want to remove that. And so just like in short, like less time per thing. And then YouTube is prioritizing session watch time, right? Which is, can we, like, if we watch one video, can we basically get someone to watch another video? So this is where you can extend the session watch time by cards and all these different things that people put at the end of the videos. So I'll bring this back to this, which is, we looked at the data for this channel. We prioritized these two metrics, and then based on that, we came up with these basic content pillars. So for example, this is what we were talking about. You can have like technical tutorials and demos, and here are some video directions for that, right? You can have career advice and tips. You can have product reviews and comparisons. So for a tech audience, it was a comparison of different like cloud platforms like AWS and Azure. You can have thought leadership style videos, and then interviews and profiles. And then from there, we, again, bring it back to like the parent topics and the different video directions, that those become the content branches. And then for this channel, we started publishing these. And this was the cool thing, which is, if you see at the bottom row here, this is the number of net new subscribers the channel was gaining every week. And so you can see when we started at 10 September, it had 85 new channels. And the next week, 88 new subscribers, 82 new subscribers, and then it starts taking off. And then the cool thing about YouTube, more than any platform that I've seen, is it can basically compound on itself and go exponential. So within a few months, we went from having 85 new subscribers a week to almost 5,000 new subscribers a week by focusing on these content branches and channels and everything else. And so this really, I see as the power of YouTube, which is when you can create something that is good and what people want, and YouTube gets feedback that people actually like it, it will start compounding on itself and growing without you having to do more work or put more effort in. So that's where we'll stop. And we can go to questions.
Wow. It's very clear. There's a reason why you are such an expert on this, Sachit, and your team, that data person, boy, oh boy, valuable. I can't believe how much data you collect. If folks feel comfortable, feel free to raise your hand and ask a question. We have about a couple minutes, and then we'll go into breakout rooms, and Sachit might be a guest visitor into one of those. Please don't feel free to keep your video off, and you can also drop it into the chat and I can read it aloud if anybody has questions. I have a million questions, actually. I've been writing them as I went. So if we have nobody, I might ask one of those.
And while people are writing that, I just want to plus one what you said, Amanda, which is, yes, when I first looked at the amount of data that YouTube gives you, as opposed to like podcasting and audio platforms, it was just like, whoa, why hasn't Apple done this, right? And you can make so many decisions based on that data and inform what you create. That I really believe, like, once you get into the right feedback loop, your audience will basically tell you what kind of content you want to make from there.
Yeah. Well, I'm not seeing any questions. I'm just going to ask a really quick
I have a question.
Oh, go for it, Tanya, please.
Hi. Well, maybe it's a very basic question because I don't know. I haven't any podcast in YouTube at the moment. So how do you monitor? So how, for example, I have seen that you can put ads, and with that ads, like you can monetize the podcast. Sorry, probably it's very basic. How do you do that? Like what I have to do?
First of all, great to meet you. No, and that's not a basic question at all. I think YouTube, they just changed it because you want to get to like 1,000 subscribers and a few other requirements. And then you can basically turn on Google AdSense on your channel. To be very honest, we haven't gotten to that point because we also recently launched. So we haven't started monetizing that way. We don't have enough time to cover sponsorships. Maybe, Amanda, we could do a different thing on that. But my basic advice on sponsorships podcasters is, instead of trying to work with too many brands, work with a few brands and create deals that are both long-term and cover a bunch of different things so that they can then not say, hey, what is a CPM? And build those kinds of relationships with brands. A quick anecdote on that is I worked with a podcast called Mixergy over 5 years and ran their sponsorships. And while the standard CPM, I think in podcasting is like 25, we were selling ads at over $100 CPM. But because we got brands ROI, because we were giving them more than just the podcast, we would give them ads and all these different things. I think in our last year, the revenue was over $500,000, and it was only 14 companies, because we built these kinds of like long-term relationships. So I would actually say, if you're starting to do YouTube and you don't have a big audience, find a few companies that you can partner with for the long term and do more branded sort of deals versus just the Google AdSense.
Thank you so much. I'm seeing a head nod from Tanya. And Sachit, I just dropped into the chat. It sounds like, I mean, we don't have bandwidth right now in this talk, although I love, as we all know, as content creators, you got to leave people wanting more, to continue thinking about like, how does this translate? Like, as you know, in podcasting, in the traditional formats, there's dynamic ad insertion, and there's host thread kind of baked in, pre, mid, and post roll ads, which I'm sure Tanya is kind of like thinking, how does that translate into YouTube? Because that is currently how people are monetizing. And it sounds like your feedback right now is, if you do have partnerships that are saying, you know, on the YouTube platform and your content there to read, focus on one or two for now. Okay. Great. I'm trying to be a good note taker for everybody. Folks, I think we have really touched on a lot of amazing stuff. Sachit has kindly agreed to allow an abridged version of this PDF to be shared for you wonderful I was going to say Facebook members, excuse me, TPA members in the member website. So look out for that. I'll make sure folks are aware of that. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. Again, thanks everybody for tuning in. We are not over yet for the live attendees, but this is going to be viewable for folks at home. So I hope this has been helpful.